Now we are asking the second presenter, Dr. Cynthia Pon from the Center of Catholic Studies of the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Dr. Cynthia will be talking about navigating a sustainable neighborhood, the example of Hong Kong. Dr. Cynthia Pon is a research associate of the Center for Catholic Studies, the Chinese University of Hong Kong. She received her PhD in comparative literature from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Her research interests are in communication of differences, poetry, and the church in China. She is interested in working the practice of spiritual and ecological sustainability. So most welcome, Cynthia Pon, and over to you.
Hello, everyone. So thank you very much for this opportunity to share in this symposium, dialogue of China and the pandemic disruption. And I guess I was also a little surprised that I was placed in a session called Institutional Success Through Dialogue, probably because thinking in terms of institution, it's something set up, it's kind of like functions as a precept, and that's not exactly what I have in mind with my presentation on navigating a sustainable neighborhood. So I thought maybe I'd slow down a bit and define some of the terms that I'm using. I want to quote Pope Francis' message to a recent message actually to the participants of the event, preparing the future, building a sustainable, inclusive, regenerative economy. And there he talked about success, not in terms so much of profits, expansion, short-term returns. Instead, he said, may the measure of success be the number of people who move out of extreme poverty, who can work decently. Is it so difficult to assure the conditions whereby everyone can contribute to transforming the world with their work? You can make a difference. How I wish that everyone would accept the responsibility to prepare a different future. I guess I've always been struck by how Pope Francis uses the phrase prepare the future. He meant it in a different way from, say, the usual, maybe more usual phrase, prepare for the future, because prepare for the future suggests that the future is already something fixed. And whereas prepare the future means everyone can have a stake and have a role in shaping that future. So I hope that, in terms of talking about institutional success, this is the kind of success that we are talking about. So I thought I would continue by looking at some of the terms that I'm using here. The word sustain, I think the dictionary definition, the dictionary gives it the definition of to give support to nourish, to prolong, to bear up under. And often nowadays, the context, we talk about sustainable consumption, sustainable development, but often it's sustainable for some and not for others. So there is implied, I think, a sense of inequity there, and definitely poverty for majority of the world population. Then we also talk about the sustainability of ecosystems and biodiversity. And I think most of the news that we hear actually is that, we are living very much in an unsustainable lifestyle now. And but I think these terms and definitions of sustain suggest to us that sustain actually means more than to live on and not die. So we're just not hoping to prolong indefinitely, but rather we're also addressing the quality of existence. It's also a question of fairness and justice. The word sustain, because it suggests support and nourish, so it implies relationality. And it also involves network, because what one does would definitely affect others. So actually, I think a lot of people, different people have different definitions of what they mean by sustainability. And I think it's a question, that would be interesting for each of us to ask ourselves. There are some, for instance, who think about sustainability in terms of collaboration, adapting, assessing, readjusting according to the circumstances, sustainability in terms of passion and freedom and imagination, sustainability in terms of learning and accumulating experience and therefore problem solving, but also moving toward a regenerative economy. Then there's also the moral sense of values, sustainability in terms of living out one's values and rethinking those values as well. Then I move on to neighbor with the famous question in the Gospel of Luke. A lawyer asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" And I think Jesus' notion of neighbor is precisely not someone self-isolated in one's home, an experience that we've all had during the last few years. The neighbor is also someone vulnerable, unclean, and on the margins, like in the gospel. Jesus was referring to the Samaritan, and the Samaritan, the usually unrecognized neighbor, is someone also who cares personally and not just theologically or theoretically, to the point of paying for the care of the wounded person. So I think a lot of times we think in terms of buildings. I mean, I think in Hong Kong, we always struggle with the problem of living arrangements, overcrowdedness, not enough, housing. But instead of thinking in terms of building buildings, which have a tendency, because a lot of the times, as we urbanize, it's more toward the tendency of isolating. Actually, I hardly know my next door neighbor. I ran into him twice recently in the elevator, and each time he greeted me kind of surprised when we all step out together. We live on the same floor, but we don't know each other. So there is that tendency of high-rise buildings kind of encouraging a kind of anonymity. Also, there is also the tendency to atomize, because each one is left on his or her own, and there's not. Whereas in a neighborhood, people can get to know one another. You can know one another's stories. You get to know one another's personalities. So instead of that, stripping down or pulverizing, I would say, of just kind of continually building buildings. So the neighborhood, actually, we can think of it in terms of a local neighborhood, but we can also think in terms of a global neighborhood. So I guess I'm trying to set up a kind of, before I move on to talk about the sustainable neighborhoods, what are some of the odds against that? What are some of the challenges? A recent UNDP report notes that because of the pandemic, the wars, the climate change, the food crises, inflation, all these multiple crises actually halts the progress, as 9 out of 10 countries fall backwards in human development. And for the first time in 32 years that we have the Human Development Index, an index that measures not just the GDP, but also a nation's health, education, standard of living, that has declined globally for 2 years in a row. And we're back to the 2016 levels, reversing much of the progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals, which were set for 2030. So here we are 3 years after the outbreak of a pandemic. And recently, just a few weeks ago, actually, Bruce Harwood, the WHO coordinator of the ACT Accelerator Partnership, which helps the poor countries access the COVID-19 tools, including vaccines. I guess he was, he was practically shouting, the pandemic is not yet over for us, for most of the world, meaning those who lack vaccine and infrastructure to deliver tests and treatment. So while some in the world are talking about imagining, envisaging the end of the pandemic, for the majority of the world, is not yet over. So I recall another message by Pope Francis in 2017, an address he made to the Fourth World Meeting of Popular Movements. And these are movements of, for the most part, NGOs, of people who are outside the formal economy, like migrant laborers, the sanitation workers, you know, so sort of like those who don't have a steady employment. And so he was saying these are the signs of the times that we need to recognize in order to act. And he was saying this actually before the pandemic, but already by that time, signs are that we need to work together. And his suggestion was that we work locally, side by side with your neighbors, organizing among yourselves to make your communities thrive. No to economy of exclusion and inequality, but work for a humanizing reality. So as the pandemic disrupts, we actually get a chance to contemplate what the human community is and is about. And I quote here a text by Dietrich Bonhoeffer in Life Together. He was saying, he was talking about Christian brotherhood. Not only the other person who is earnest and devout, who comes to me seeking brotherhood and as I deal with in fellowship. My brother is rather that other person who has been redeemed by Christ, delivered from his sin and called to faith and eternal life. What determines our brotherhood is what that person is by reason of faith. Our community with one another consists solely in what Christ has done to both of us. So I think as we talk about dialogue, sometimes, like Professor O'Brien was saying earlier, we have to think, kind of prepare for those breakdowns, for times when the dialogue breaks down. Sometimes, you know, we may be so caught up, or we have to protect, we think we have to protect ourselves, and we have to cut off the dialogue with others. So, which is pretty much where most countries have been in the last 2 years or so. And this year we're starting to let up and allow more people in, so to speak. So Dietrich Bonhoeffer was saying that it's for those who have faith, is actually what Christ has done to us that matters. It's not so much, we're not talking about an ideal, based on an ideal of mutual understanding, or a psychic reality of wish, fear, memories, and anticipation, which is where I think, you know, with these, in a state of siege, I think we tend to think in terms of, we tend to second guess others, and, you know, the safest thing would be to protect ourselves and shut ourselves in. But I think Dietrich Bonhoeffer was pointing out that actually Christian brotherhood, and I would suggest here is the human brotherhood that we're talking about, is not an ideal, but it's a divine reality. and it's a spiritual instead of psychic reality. And I think it's interesting how Dietrich Bonhoeffer, thinks of divine reality and spiritual reality as very firm, and he affirms these terms. They're much more stable than the ideal and the psychological. So I want to go back to the Chinese policy, the zero. I think it's the elephant in the room right now. I mean, all of us have to contend or deal with it somehow. China's zero tolerance COVID-19 policy. Recently, the Oxford COVID-19 government response tracker rates China's stringency level as of September at 69.91%. And in May, it was close to 80%. So it's down a little bit, but it's still the highest. So you can see actually in this graphic here, China, in terms of stringency level, government stringency level, China is right up there and on par with countries like Togo, Mali. It's an interesting congregation, I would say, because a lot of the other developed countries are really in the middle or even further down. So we have Hong Kong, for instance, tagging close behind at 50 something, and Japan is Japan is at 30 something, whereas Australia it's at 11 something in terms of the stringency level. Meaning by that, of course, many of us are familiar with it in different ways. China has been having lockdowns, and even the rumors of such lockdowns would precipitate panic buying, and panic in terms of healthcare, dealing with all sorts of life necessities. So I think we're all familiar with some of the quarantine, the universal mandatory vaccination, restrictions on gatherings, etc. I thought I'd slip in quickly here some data about the COVID-19 vaccine doses administered. Actually, China, Hong Kong, Singapore, Australia, I mean, these are all countries that, or places that have a high vaccination rate compared with, say, worldwide, 68% of the world population has received at least one dose of the vaccine. And more strikingly, 22.9% of people in low-income countries have received at least one dose. So I think that means 77% of people in low-income countries have not received one dose. So where are we in Hong Kong? We definitely have the Leave Home Safe app, which is a kind of tracking device. We have the vaccine pass, meaning you need that to go into a lot of places like, actually all places right now, I think, restaurants, supermarkets, cinemas, schools, what have you. And then people are subjected to compulsory tests if there's a case in your neighborhood, tracking wristband, health codes, etc. We're slowly going from the hotel quarantine to medical surveillance right now. But we still have the 4-person public gathering ban with masks. But the irony is 12 people can eat together at a table without masks. And the upshot of all this is the Hong Kong General Chamber of Commerce survey shows that about 30% of large firms are considering leaving or have already departed. In Hong Kong, yesterday we heard about the social innovation in Hong Kong. Hong Kong prides itself on being a smart city. And in December 2020, we released the Smart City Blueprint 2.0 with one specific chapter on the use of IT in combating COVID-19, and you will see that the Leap Home Safe app and the monitoring devices are heavily featured. Kind of just also as a kind of larger backdrop to part of the Smart City 2.0 addresses climate action plan, but it's all kind of fuzzy, you know, with targets, but we don't know how exactly that's going to be achieved. And sometimes it means setting up funds or pouring money into certain sectors, but at least in the plan itself, it doesn't talk much about, you know, how all those steps would take us to carbon neutrality and conservation in society. So there is this index again offered by the Institute for Management Development, ranking Hong Kong of all the smart cities. Hong Kong ranks 41 out of 118. Our technologies were given an A rating, but our structures just BB. In particular, the city did not perform well in areas concerning the environment, mobility, green spaces, and governance. And some commentators in the South China Morning Post also remarked, the blueprint aims to deliver a higher quality of living and greater happiness for Hong Kongers, but what are the plans to use technology to involve the public when designing policy, let alone in its implementation? So I would only briefly mention we were in the Bloomberg, we made international news recently. An article in Bloomberg News talked about the development of high-rises in the Northwest area, which is where the city is aiming to develop most of its new technology sites and housing conglomerates. So, but that's also, the Northwest is also the area, some of you who are familiar with Hong Kong will know that that's also the wetlands area with significant populations of migratory birds, for instance. So, so we're talking about people, the developers, real estate developers are trying to develop the blue area. Here, let's see if I can show it. This is the border between Hong Kong and Shenzhen. This is the Shenzhen Bay, or the deeper bay. And this is the wetlands area, the green part. And now the developers are appealing to develop the buffer zone. And of course, there are, that's controversial because the migratory birds, for instance, without the buffer zones, that might impact on the biodiversity of this area. And also, of course, the wetlands are known to absorb the floods, which is getting to be more and more a problem as the climate, with climate change. And actually, one of the spokesperson for the real estate developer was saying, remarked how, you know, the buffer area is mainly abandoned wasteland or degraded fish ponds with low ecological value. But actually, what happened was all these the last 20, 30 years, there have been repeated news of mysterious depositing of concrete or you know, the degradation of the wetlands of the farmlands happening, and no one's ever caught. But you know, the result though is that, you know, these lands then become perceived as you know, unsuitable for farming or for agriculture. So they are instead, there's a greater chance that they're being allocated for housing development. So I want to move very quickly then to, because the title realized the title has been modified a little bit by the organizers. It's examples, navigating a sustainable neighborhood, examples from Hong Kong. So, so I do want to talk a little bit about Hong Kong and how walking or rambling could be a way of building sustainable community. I quote here from Michel de Certeau, The Practice of Everyday Life. He was talking about this, the city being kind of reified or elevated to, kind of universal and anonymous subject. It gradually becomes possible to attribute to it as to its political model, Hobbes state all the functions and predicates that were previously scattered and assigned to many different real subjects, groups, associations, or individuals. So I'm thinking actually here of all the tracking devices, the surveillance, cameras, all the ways that the individual's freedom has been encroached upon. And he was making a point that the walker increases the number of possibilities, for example, by creating shortcuts and detours and prohibitions. For example, by forbidding oneself to take paths generally considered accessible, even obligatory. And he talks about it as a rhetoric of walking. So I guess what I'm trying to juxtapose is between, an all observing and all controlling center on the one hand, there are still things that the margins, the neighborhoods, the smaller units can do. And taking de Certeau's example, he talks about the walking as a practice that at least recaptures for us, a sense of autonomy. He goes on to talk about the long poem of walking manipulates spatial organizations, no matter how panoptic they may be. It's neither foreign to them. It can take place only within them, nor in conformity with them. It does not receive its identity from them. It inserts its multitudinous references and citations into them. So actually, I've been inspired by quite a number of books that have been written in the last, I think starting about 3 years ago, but more and more are coming out, particularly in these last few years. They have to do with walking. They're books about walking. For instance, this one is about literary walks. People may think of Hong Kong as mostly a place for business without really, much art or culture, but in fact, Professor Lo Wai-Lin had spent her lifetime amassing and documenting the trails, different trails of different artists and writers in the local, in Hong Kong, including those writers who fled from China to Hong Kong during the Second World War, and who had some who stayed, some stayed, but most went back to China. But many of them did have significant impact on the literature of Hong Kong. Then this book is about engagement of art as a form of engagement in different neighborhoods. Also very provocative work. And this one is brand new. I think it just came out this year, and it's called Xiangcheng Ji Zhao, remade in Hong Kong. And Xiangcheng is another name for Hong Kong. It's not the factual name of Hong Kong, it's the imaginary name of Hong Kong. And in this book, he talks, the different authors collaborated in this book, and they started with one community of Wan Chai, people just talking about what it meant for them to grow up in this area, how the neighborhood has changed, the different kind of walks, took them to school, and the different varieties of itineraries, and then also another part of the book deals with nowadays how, for instance, several members of the neighborhood started a recycling stand maybe several times a week in the neighborhood, and they really started small. They gather the people, start to bring the materials, and one person actually would bring them home and clean them properly, and then carry them to the recycling place. There's also let me see, yeah. They actually, the book also talks about this. There are bookshops actually in Hong Kong's rather enclosed atmosphere these days. A lot of bookshops, independent bookshops have sprung up, and they do much more than sell books. You can see people would drop in, and young people would come in and take a look at the books, look at other displays that are there. They serve actually, as many of them actually serve as incubators of ideas and regenerating the neighborhood. This is also another example of some of you may have heard it in the news. The Mill. It is the Hong Kong's only recycling plant for paper packages of beverages, and they set up business 3 years ago. I think they try to live out the idea of the recycled or regenerative economy. They take the paper, the Tetra Pak paper, recycle them, and they make them into different kinds of paper and resell it to different organizations or businesses that support them. So this is actually, a very good example of the sustainable neighborhood that keeps the value within the community. But as some of you may have heard in the news, actually the government is trying to evict them now because their business is not deemed high-tech enough for the area that they are developing, the government is developing. So I think in terms of building a sustainable neighborhood, we are actually contending with different ideas, different epistemologies, if you will. And I quote from the book, Neighborhoods for the Future: "Behind the materiality of today's cities are ideas. Modernist urbanism had a preference for geometry and tabula rasa, which means erasing existing landscapes to create the optimal spatial conditions for design freedom. It suggests a superiority of analytical thinking over a type of knowledge that sees urban life as something that is growing, changing, and constantly shifting. The idea of a modernist visionary privileged access to knowledge also suggested a limited openness to discussion, to debate, and to amendments, indeed to politics." So I guess whereas we have, a panoptic state, a center that tries to organize and design and control everything. We are also trying to find ways to keep on growing, to change shape, to build coalitions, to talk with one another, and to build relationships on the neighborhood level. So the authors of that book suggested a term called ecological urbanism. And this is really a new approach to planning that's appreciative of context, how people make a living in cities, how cities are fundamentally about movement and change, both of materials and natural flows, as of people and their values and ideas, the city as a living organism. versus an optimum, an ideal city. So I go back to this picture. This book is called Remade in Hong Kong. So instead of made in Hong Kong, we are in the process of remaking things in Hong Kong. I also want to bring in those of us who are believers. Remember that in Gaudium et Spes, the church has said that it is in full accord of human nature that juridical political structures should, with ever better success and without any discrimination, afford all their citizens a chance to participate freely and actively in establishing the constitutional basis of a political community, governing the state, determining the scope and purpose of various institutions, and choosing leaders. So I think to the extent that we are talking about institution, this is the kind of institution that would be sustainable. Not so much the all-controlling, the depersonalizing structures that we often see in Hong Kong. I think we have whole neighborhoods, whole areas of the city where people live far away from work and they have to, commute long distance and spend a lot of money on the transportation. And it's the experience is just not, it may be viable, but it's not fulfilling or flourishing. So I end with the quote from two quotes from Laudato Si, with Pope Francis saying that let ours be a time remembered for the awakening of a new reference for life, the firm resolve to achieve sustainability, the quickening of the struggle for justice and peace, and the joyful celebration of life. A commitment this lofty to passionate concern for the protection of our world cannot be sustained by doctrine alone, without a spirituality capable of inspiring us, without an interior impulse which encourages, motivates, nourishes, and gives meaning to our individual and communal activity. So I think, actually in doing this, preparing this presentation, I noticed that I'm only scratching the surface. I think what I need to do next is really to go deeper into my own neighborhood and talk with more people who have experience in making the neighborhoods work. In my neighborhood, for instance, our parish has been, we have broken through some boundaries these last few years. We have become, we have gone outside the premises of the church. We have become literally friends with some of the homeless people, the sanitary workers, but still, I think there's much more we can do in terms of building the relationship. One definition that someone gave about whether or not we're living in a neighborhood, whether we have a neighborhood or not, is are you able to get something, to buy things on credit? And I remember thinking a few weeks back, I looked around and I thought, really, there's no place I can get credit. I can get things on credit. But finally, I found one lady who sells newspapers across from my church, and I see her every week. And I asked her, and we chatted sometimes, and I asked her if one day I forgot my money, would she be able to give me the newspaper on credit? And she said yes. So I think that's a good start, and I think that's what I need to do more, to plunge more into the neighborhood. I would like to end with this picture, which has been the background of my slideshow. It's actually the photo of the footprints of an adolescent carrying a toddler. And this actually a picture from fossilized footprints taken. These footprints belong to two people who lived in the Pleistocene age, about that would be more than 12,000 years ago, in the New Mexico area of today. And according to the paleontologists, the researchers, scientists, the toddler was carrying a child on his or her left side and walking at a very fast pace, presumably trying to reach a safe place in a short time. And occasionally, the child would be put down on the ground to adjust the weight, or so the adolescent can take a breath. So these are the tracks moving in this direction, and these are the tracks coming back. The adolescent is coming back alone. So presumably, the child has been deposited somewhere in safety. I guess the scientists also found that in between these two journeys that this person made, there were also, not shown in this picture, but the tracks of mammals, of giant sloths. So I mean, these are the times when human beings lived, in proximity with other species. So on the one hand, I guess I'm thankful that even 12,000 years ago, human beings already have this compassion, to protect, to look after one's young, to shelter someone from harm. And on the other hand, I guess it's interesting to note that the mammoths and the giant sloths have all vanished as a species now. So I think we are at that kind of turning point in our survival as a species. We can go either way. Hopefully, it's not following the tracks of the mammoths. So I'll end there. Apologize for this very rushed presentation.